on, Shadow Corner fam? It's your friendly neighborhood life coach, Cyan Gates. I am here today on this lovely Saturday afternoon. It's kind of rainy, but that does not mean that it's a good day. It's not a good day. It just means it's good sleep weather in the South. So if you are from South Carolina, 9 times out of 10, you ain't planning on going nowhere. And if you are, it'll probably be somewhere indoors. But anywho, I want to introduce our lovely guests. But first, I want to also give a shout out to the NAMI Project. Because this t-shirt, well, I got to get this right this way. This t-shirt is John Miracle's Squad. It's in honor of my friend's brother that is dealing with mental health issues. Since we are in the midst of Mental Health Month, I thought it'd be a good idea for us to talk about some of the core things when it comes to shadow work. I know the previous conversation we talked about having with our spiritual coach, Ms. Cheryl Steele, about knowing your purpose, your light, and bringing those shadows into the light in order for you to move forward. But what happens when you have to learn to live past it and then begin to grow into who you're meant to be through it? So for this episode, I thought that we should have somebody that not only knows the true meaning of the shadows, but knows how to be the advocate of them as well. So in this episode of Living Beyond Trauma, Healing, Empathy, and Legacy, I have the honor to interview this lovely, lovely woman. So the space where we can shine on the inner work that shapes our outer lives. Today, we're here to honor and introduce a powerful voice in the world of healing and resilience. I'm honored to introduce to you Miss Susan Snow. Now, Miss Susan is a trauma resilience coach, a dynamic speaker, as well as an author of the deeply moving book, which will soon be on audio soon, The Other Side of the Gun. Her journey began in imagining with an unimaginable tragedy. There we go. Brain. Let's see. At just 17 years old, Susan lost her father, LAPD Detective Thomas C. Williams, who was killed in the line of duty on October 31st, 1985. This high-profile nature of his murder thrusted her and her family in unwanted spotlight, intensifying the trauma of her loss. But through years of struggle, healing, and growth, sometimes steady, sometimes not, Susan has emerged with a mission to help others navigate the shadow of their own pain. And her work gives voice to the trauma survivors, offering not just insight, but empathy, compassion, and hope. So let's welcome Miss Susan. Miss Susan, how you doing?
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Hi. How are you this day? I know it's raining on my side of town, so how's it over there with you?
It's about 80 degrees here.
Ooh, is it humid 80 or is it just regular?
No.
80?
Oh no. Colorado has no humidity. We have dry heat.
I don't know how it would last in Colorado because
lots of lotion.
Yeah.
Lots of water, lots of lotion. Yes.
Yes. I feel like it's going to be like extra dry.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends. So we've had a little bit of so we have like afternoon rain showers here. They start about 2:00 in the afternoon and they go for about an hour and then they just move on out. So we do get a little bit of humidity sometimes, but it doesn't really happen until like July.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's good to hear that about that on the other side of the world. But I know that this is a thoroughly moving show, and I want to make sure that my viewers get everything that they came here for.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
let's start from the beginning. Let's talk about, can you share a bit about who you are today and what brought you to work to do as a trauma resilience coach?
Yeah. So, well, my journey has brought me here. Coaching has always been a part of my life in some sort of way, depending on what I did. So, for many years, I was a hairdresser, and they call us the armchair therapist.
Ah,
Um, so, in that, I was coaching a little bit. I also was an instructor. I did trade shows and things like that. And then I went into real estate. And as I was in real estate, I realized that there was more to selling homes than just selling homes. And a lot of it had to do with mindset. So I started to coach mindset. And at the time that I was doing that, I was also writing my book. So writing my book took me 4.5 years. And diving deep and doing that, I realized that that was part of my purpose, was to take what I've learned about myself in the journey. And I knew that once I had hit a certain point after doing some of the mental work, that I still felt stuck in my life. And so I felt like that was a place where people needed to go once they've done a little bit of work, and they have a little bit of tools to manage whatever it is mentally that they are dealing with, especially within trauma. So what I do is I just take where they are, I meet them where they are, and move them forward. So whether that is within their relationships, within being a parent, or just in career, um, that's where I come into play. I'm
okay.
also married. I've been married for 32 years to the same man. We've been together total 40 years, which you will hear. And I have 3 beautiful children. So I will not discuss their ages, however.
Understood. Understood. That is respect. Because like
Thanks.
I said, you
I
you
don't discuss it.
oh no, you're good. You are fine. I know, like, that is wonderful. Even after going through something like that at 17, you were still able to push past and be able to live your life.
Yeah.
And I know, like, for some people that stops them from being on the outside world. So
Hmm.
let's talk about it.
Okay.
Let's talk about your father, and
Hmm.
what do you remember most vividly about him, and how did his laws shape your teenage years from that point on?
Oh my gosh. So my dad was an incredible human being, and he was very present as a father. And I was very grateful for that. He was like that with everyone, though. So whether you worked with him, whether you were married to him, whether you were his child, no matter where you were in the conversation with him, he made you feel like you were the most important person in that room. And I loved that about him. Um, as far as being the cop dad, well, that was a different thing because, he tended to be a little more on the strict side. Um, he saw depravity in this world. He saw what happened to young girls, when bad things happen. And so, because of that, he was very honest with me, especially as a teenager, about my safety and being aware of my surroundings. And he didn't like me to wear makeup because, he didn't want me to grow up faster than I needed to. And he was also my safety guard. I always felt like I was safe because my dad was around, and he was a bigger man. He was 6 feet tall. And, he always made me feel safe. Um, so, I was really grateful for that. I was grateful to have a dad like that. Not
Is it a
everybody is
dad thing to
lucky.
keep their little girls? Because my
Yeah.
father used to do the same thing. Only difference is he would dress me like a boy so that way I'd be undercover. And that way no one would notice hips and thighs
Yeah.
and stuff. So he would put me in long shorts and like tried to dress me as a dude the
Yeah.
whole time. And my mom was like, "You're going to have to accept that your daughter is going to be a girl."
Right. Right. Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, he was protective, but in a way, he was also very open with me. I felt like I could tell my dad anything and there was no judgment. And unfortunately, I didn't have that with my mother. So it was good for me to have one parent that was like that.
Okay. So I know that the death itself was hard on you, like for yourself individually, but the fact that it was publicly, it probably brought a lot of pressures. How did you navigate through that grief as you were going throughout like years later? Because I know like something like this doesn't go away just by a couple of years. Some people probably reference it and you may have been probably triggered or
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, it was I can tell you my story so that your listeners know, what my story is. Um so as a 17-year-old girl, my dad was a Los Angeles police detective, robbery homicide detective. And on October 31st, 1985, he had gone to testify in a case that he was the lead detective on. And that was the plan that night was that he would pick up my little brother from school. My brother was 6 at the time. And I was at home with my mom. My mom had just gotten home and she was in her costume and chatting with me. And the phone rang, and I was supposed to go to a party that night. I was going to beg and plead with my parents to let me go to this party and schmooze them any way I can. But I had to wait for my dad to get home. And so the phone rang, and I ran across the room and I picked up the phone. And it wasn't for me. It was a lady from my brother's school. And all she said was that there was a drive-by shooting and my dad was involved. And I just kind of froze. My mom had rounded the corner, so I just handed her the phone really quickly. And as I was watching her talk to the lady on the phone, I could tell that it was bad by her demeanor and her posture and everything. She got off the phone and she said, "We're going to the school." So we got in the car and we drove to the school, and it's about a 7-minute ride to the school from my childhood home. And as we got there, the way that the school is put together, there's a parking lot that's in the middle of the school. And after school, the kids they get out at the backside of the school. And this was nighttime by now. It was after 5 o'clock. So we started walking and heading towards the back of the school, and you could just see the sky lit up by all the police cars. And there was an ambulance that sat in the roadway. And as we were walking towards it, we kind of glanced over and saw my dad's truck. So we started to run towards the truck. The closer that we got to the truck, there was glass on the ground. And we rounded the truck, and there he was, partially covered up. And I watched my mom just drop to her knees and start screaming. And as a kid, I didn't know what I was I wasn't comprehending what I was seeing. I couldn't put 2 and 2 together. And it was so surreal that what I did was I focused on the ambulance. And in my head, I just kept saying, "Why isn't anyone helping him? I couldn't understand. And so it wasn't very long. Two officers grabbed our arms and kind of escorted us into the school. And I went into an office, sat down. My mom got taken away. Now, at this point, I didn't know where my brother was. I didn't know if he was hurt. I had no information whatsoever. And I was just sitting there trying to process everything. It was very chaotic that night, very, very chaotic. And I heard two women that were talking in the office, and the one lady said that my dad was deceased. And that's when it hit me. That's when my world crashed. And I just wanted to get up off that chair and run out of that room as fast as I could. But my legs felt like cement and I couldn't move. And it wasn't a little bit later that my mom came up to me and said, "I'm sending you with a neighbor." And I know that I wanted to run away from this situation. But at the other side of that, like I was still a kid. So as a kid, I wanted to be with my family unit. I needed an adult. You know, I needed my mom. I needed to be with my brother, and I didn't get that. I did go to the neighbor's house, and I felt so bad for her because she'd known my family forever. And she was trying to process everything that was going on and her pain and sadness over everything because she knew it was bad. My whole neighborhood was filled with police cars, and there were um, helicopters overhead. The media showed up because it was a big story at the time. And here she had his daughter, who was totally inconsolable, standing on her porch. And she tried really desperately to calm me down and try to be there for me. And at the time, I'd been dating this guy for 3 months and all I wanted was him. So I asked her to call, and she did. And unfortunately, when she called him, she didn't give him a whole lot of information. So he showed up at the door, and like any normal person, he said, you know, "Get your purse, get your jacket, let's go. What hospital is he at? Where's your mom? Where's your brother?" And I couldn't spit out the words. I couldn't say it. And as he became more persistent that we left, I finally blurted it out. "He's gone. He's not at a hospital. He's gone." And I watched my 19-year-old boyfriend drop to his knees and start sobbing. And we just kind of held each other, and we were both trying to figure out what are the next steps. Like, what do we do now? We had no idea what we were doing. This was the 80s. This was the mid 80s. And there was really no talk of mental health back then. Definitely nothing really known about PTSD. They were just starting to do studies. And there definitely weren't any kind of, people we could talk to or resources for children. In fact, LAPD, they were set up to take care of the widow and the widowers, but they weren't really set up at the time for the children. So we just kind of had to figure out what our next steps were. When I did go home that night, my house was filled with strangers. I had no idea who they were. I could hear my mom talking in the background, but she didn't even realize I had came home. And I literally did not want to see anyone. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to answer questions. I didn't want to know anything. I just ran into my room and hid with my boyfriend. And I stayed there all night, even when he left. There were still people in my house all night. I can hear my brother cry, so I knew he was okay. Thank God. He didn't get hurt physically, but mentally he did. And I heard him cry and I couldn't do anything about it. Like I had nothing left. I just sank into my bed and woke up. I didn't even wake up because I didn't sleep. I just looked outside and noticed it was sunlight. And the first time I got to actually physically see my brother was the next morning around 11 o'clock. It was like late morning. And it was the first time that I could just hug him and tell him it was going to be okay. Unfortunately, it was a time where nothing like this had ever happened before. So it was the first time a police officer was actually assassinated for doing their job. And the man that he had testified against that day was the one that did it. It was a conspiracy and it had been planned for months. Unbeknownst to us, we were too a target. And so I had police presence all over my neighborhood for 6 days until they caught him. And caught them, I should say. So I went from being this like regular teenage girl to this person that had all of this police presence, and I had no privacy whatsoever. None. I couldn't grieve in private. There was always someone in my face. Always. And it was always a stranger. And the media, because all the focus was on my brother, of course, the media didn't even realize he had a teenage daughter for 2 days. So between being sent home or sent to a neighbor's house and not being acknowledged by other people, I felt like I wasn't important in this scenario. And so that was another stressor. That was another trauma on top of what I had just experienced. And, and that was really hard for me. And part of it too was that, my dad was the go-between. He was my voice of reason when it came to my relationship with my mother. And now I didn't have that anymore. So I had to navigate that relationship without him. And it was hard. I just was at the time not understanding everything that was going on with me. And it was all the things that happened within PTSD. I had severe depression. I wanted so badly to be with my dad, so I had suicidal ideation. I just didn't recognize it. I didn't know how to verbalize that. I had panic attacks. My anxiety was all the time. I was constantly on edge, and I wasn't sleeping, which exacerbates all of that. And I was not able to, I was not aware enough to be able to communicate all of those things that were going on with me. And I thought if I did, they'd probably lock me up. They'd be like, she's nuts. Let's just put her away. And so I didn't say anything to anybody. My boyfriend knew that I was struggling, but he didn't know. He was a kid too, 19. And he didn't know how to handle all of this either. So we were both kind of flailing in the wind, so to speak. It wasn't until like I don't know, it was about a month later. My mom came to me and she said that LAPD was going to pay for therapy for all three of us. And at the time, I just thought if you go to a therapist, you're nuts. Like that was just my teenage mentality. But I was also at a state of mind where if you pushed me in a direction, I'd go in that direction. I lived in a fog and I wasn't really living. I was existing at that point. So when she voluntold me that I was going to therapy, I went. And in hindsight, at the time, I feel like the therapist didn't know or didn't want to dip his toes into the type of trauma he was dealing with. I don't think that he was trauma competent, or even informed in that point. So he never asked me those questions. He never asked me how that night affected me. And I feel like he didn't do that because he was like, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds. So he kept the sessions we had very shallow, very common. Like all we talked about was my relationship with my mom, my brother, my boyfriend, and school. That's it. And every week that I saw him, I thought, oh, today's the day he's going to help me feel better. And it never happened. So after a year of seeing him, he told me I was a well-rounded young lady. I was going to be fine for the rest of my life. And I didn't need to see him anymore. I walked out of that office and I thought, okay, I've cracked. I'm crazy. Not even a professional can help me. I'm just going to have to figure this out all by myself. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it. And from that day on, anytime someone said, oh, Susan, you're so brave. Oh, Susan, you're so strong. I created an emotional mask with those words. And I wore that mask so that nobody saw on the exterior what was the turmoil that was going on in the interior. And I lived like that in fight or flight for 14 years of my life. I don't recommend it. It's a very hard place to be because it really keeps you from seeing things that are true. I have a chapter in my book called Rose-Colored Glasses because that's what I walked around wearing. I was not at a place where I could recognize when I was in bad relationships with friends or, people using me for some reason or whatever. I was not able to even understand that what was going on with my mother and I was toxic. And so I took a lot of the abuse. I just allowed it to happen over and over. And she's a narcissist, so it was narcissistic abuse that I was dealing with. And her coping skill with my dad's murder was drinking. So the drinking would exacerbate the abuse. It wasn't until I was in my 30s, or not quite 30, we decided I married the boyfriend. And now I have 2 kids. And we decided to move from Southern California to Colorado. And we moved here in April of 97. My kids were very young. And I was working as a hairdresser at the time. And I worked at a salon that was very close to Littleton, Colorado. On April 20th of 1999, I was working that day, and I took a break from my client, went into the back room and turned on the little TV that was back there, and popped the coverage of the live coverage of the Columbine shootings. I had a visceral reaction. I started to sweat. I turned pale white. I knew I was starting to have a panic attack. I could feel the tingling in my fingers, and I knew it was coming. And I had never told any of my colleagues my story. Nobody had known what I had gone through, because when I left California, I wanted to pretend and leave that part of me behind. That doesn't happen, just so you know.
Yeah, no. Eventually, it pops up after a while.
Geography does not work. So I was having this visceral reaction, and I couldn't understand why. And my colleagues couldn't understand why. My kids were young. There was no way they would go to that high school. They knew I didn't live near the area. So they were confused. I was confused because I was told I was going to be fine for the rest of my life. So I didn't understand what was happening with the flashbacks that were happening. As I was watching the school and seeing kids my own age and the ambulances and the police cars and all those things, and it was causing these flashbacks to the night my dad was killed. But I did what I always do, and I put that mask back on. I finished my day. Everyone around me was upset. They were crying. They were mad. I mean, everybody else was emotional. And I was like, nope, this is not going to affect me. And I finished my day. I walked out the door, and every emotion that I had dealt with when I was 17 came flooding back to me. And I started to have the old feelings again. I started to spiral, and I knew that I was spiraling. And I kept telling myself, I'll get over it. This is just a day. I'll get over it. It'll be fine. But I kept continuing to spiral. And after a couple of days of it, my husband, the very smart man that he is, met me at the door, and he said, you have two choices. You either go get help today, or I'm putting you in a hospital. And I looked at him and I said, okay, I give up, because even though I had these thoughts of leaving this world, the other side of me was like, no, you're a mom. You can't leave your babies. And so I was having this really distressing fight in my head. So I put up that white flag and I said, okay, I'll go. So I went and I made an appointment with a physician, and he put me on antidepressants because that's what they do. And then he handed me a business card and he said, I want you to make an appointment with this therapist. And I literally laughed him in his face. I laughed because I was like, wait, I tried this 14 years ago. It didn't work. So what makes you think it's going to work this time? And he said, you don't have a choice. And I said, you're right, I don't. So I made the appointment, and I could tell in the first 3 minutes of sitting down with this woman that she was different. And this was different. She was asking me the questions that was allowing me to be vulnerable enough to tell her what I went through at 17 and what I was currently dealing with. The difference between the first therapist and her was that she specialized in severe trauma, and her specialty was PTSD. So as she was listening to me when I was finished, she looked at me and said, Susan, everything that you have been through since you were 17, everything that you've been feeling, how you've been coping or not coping, is because you have PTSD. And I kind of sat back in the chair. I was like, what? I didn't go to war. I'm not in the military. Like, what are you talking about, lady? And she said, no, anyone who experiences trauma, any kind of trauma, can have PTSD. But what you need to know is that PTSD isn't something that just goes away. It's something you learn to manage and work through. And in those words, I was like, hallelujah. I have answers. I'm not crazy. I had so much hope. And I knew that she was my person that was going to be able to guide me and help me to heal. And I was so grateful that day for so many reasons. So that began my journey of healing.
Even hearing it the second time, it still hits different. So here's my question here. When you had to write it and everything, what did the title mean to you? And I know you talked about in your book understanding and peace, and how do you define those contexts in your story? Because I know that there's a lot of people that have been truly healed by your story. So how was the reactions for people that actually had to go through something similar to what you went through? I know everybody's trauma is different.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think, the one thing, writing the book, it took me 4.5 years to do it. I didn't write it until I was 50 years old. And I kind of just drew a line in the sand and said, this is the time. I've got to do it now. And so I started that journey. And in the process of writing the book, I realized that not only with me healing and going through all of these things that I went through and putting my very authentic, very vulnerable person out there for the world, that people could maybe connect with how I was feeling and also see, yes, I felt the same way, or I've had kind of similar things going on with me, but look how she has been able to move through it. And, how I had hope when I finally found my person, that someone else could find hope in my words, in my message. And so even though writing the book was terrifying, I got to tell you, it was terrifying because I knew that I had to be 100% authentic. I couldn't leave anything out, nothing. And in doing that, I had to be very vulnerable about my feelings and, very deep, dark places that I've gone to in my mind. So putting that all out there, I also knew that in telling my story, I would have to tell other people's stories. And one of those people was my mother. And the other person was my husband, because we've been through a lot. If you read the book, you'll see we've been through a lot as well. And I was afraid that it might damage our relationship. And the third one was my safety, because the men that were involved were still in prison, And I was afraid of retaliation once I put myself out there. So, we were targets at one point. I was afraid to be a target again. And so I had to kind of step back and figure out what was more important. And I know that sounds a little crazy sometimes, but you have to find purpose in it. Even if I had to be okay with the outcomes. So I had to be okay with it possibly destroying my relationship with my mother. I had to be okay with it opening up old wounds with my husband. I had to be okay with taking my power back away from those people that hurt me and took my father. And so when that fear did arrive, and it rose up quite a bit. I would think of those people out there that needed to hear this story, that needed to have this message, and that needed to hear hope. And that would push me forward every single time. So, I felt like it was an important message to be put out there. And honestly, it was bigger than me. I literally felt like my dad was kicking me in the rear end to get this book done because he knew that I was the messenger. I'm just the conduit. That's it. This comes from something bigger than myself. And I use what happened to me and my family and my healing to try to help others. And so that's why I am so grateful to the feedback that I have gotten from people who have read the book. And I've gotten feedback of things that I didn't even think would be something someone would connect with. But for instance, I had a woman who read it, and she had lost her husband to COVID. Healthy guy. He was dead in 5 days. The love of her life. And she was absolutely spiraling one day on social media, and I saw her posts. And I thought, she needs to hear my words. So I sent her a message and I said, can I send you my book? And she said, sure, that would be amazing. So I did, and she read it. And she got back to me, and her explanation of what my book did for her was something that I didn't even think about. So she read the parts about where I talk about how my mom dealt with her pain and her trauma and how she used alcohol as a coping mechanism and what that did to our relationship. And she said, Susan, I was your mom. I recognize myself in your mom. I did to my daughter. I pushed my daughter away. I cocooned away from her. I didn't give her the support she needed. And I too fell into the bottle. And I recognize that in your book. I recognize that I was your mother. And hearing how, that behavior affected me, the daughter, was super powerful for her. It was very powerful for her. And she has since gotten sober. I just didn't even think of it that way. That was not one of the things that I thought about where people could, possibly connect with my book. So that was a lesson to me, where people could see themselves as the characters in my book. So I was really grateful for that feedback. And, I wrote it also because there was so much pain and anger in the law enforcement community around my dad's death. I mean, we're coming up on 40 years, and there's still people that will write on his memorial page to this day, which blows my mind. But it's a story that stays fresh in people's minds, I guess, which unbeknownst to me, I was like, what? So when I was writing it too, those were the people I was thinking about as well. If they could see me heal, then maybe they could heal as well and not hold all the anger and all the sadness and the bitterness in their heart anymore. And they can let that go. So.
Okay. So how do you, well, you've already answered that question. What advice would you give someone who is in the early stages of healing from trauma and loss? Because I know it's like they'll be like, words are easy to say.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You're just sitting here telling me everything everybody else has already told me. So how are you different?
Well, first of all, here's what I didn't hear. There's no one size fits all. Okay? Everybody's trauma is different. So I'm going to give you very specific things that I have learned. One is, it is your healing. It is not anyone else's healing. So you keep that in mind, right? When you go and you talk to a therapist, interview them, making sure that they're the right fit for you. And make sure that you feel like they are competent in the type of trauma that you have gone through. If they are not, bye-bye.
She's like, first, not the last.
Find someone that is, because they're the ones that are going to be able to guide you in the right way. Okay. You need to be able to allow yourself to be vulnerable. And vulnerability is terrifying. It is terrifying. So if you don't feel like you have a safe space, you're not going to be vulnerable. And if you're not vulnerable, you're not going to heal in the way that you need to. So that's number one. Number two is give yourself grace. You're going to have days where you just don't have it in you. You're done. Like, I remember coming home from some of my sessions and, I felt like I had to do things, I was a mom and I had, practice and I had to go here and go there and this and that. And I didn't really give myself time to recoup. It takes a lot out of you mentally. And so I've learned that through writing my book, because by God, there were days where I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm cooked. There's nothing left. I needed to take time and space and give myself grace with no guilt. No guilt. I can say that in big flashing lights. No guilt. Because people do, let's be honest, people will feel guilty for taking time to give themselves grace, especially if you live in, in the world where your life is always going, right? Find some time for you. Do something that gives you joy. Meditate, learn how to meditate, taking time for yourself, even if it's 5 minutes. Do it, because the most important thing for your healing is for you to heal yourself. Don't worry about everybody else, not even your kids. You need to make you the priority. when you make you the priority, it branches out to the people and the loved ones around you. They will heal as well. This is what happened with my kids. They watched mom heal, and in that, they were healing too. So, those are the most important things. And don't be afraid. You're not alone. You are not alone. So, everybody goes through different things in life, right? And some of them are god awful. And I'm so sorry for everyone who has gone through trauma. But just know that you can heal from it. And everybody has it within themselves. You have that power. And I always tell people, if you want to do something for yourself, the first thing you do is take your power back. Take your power back from the person that hurt you and the thing that hurt you. And by doing that is healing from it. You are no longer, that person or that thing no longer has a hold over you when you're able to move through your pain and work through it. And that is huge, because if you don't have that hanging over your head anymore, it feels like freedom. And it's a beautiful place to be. But also know that healing from trauma is not a sprint. It is a marathon. And so it takes time. That's why I say to give yourself grace. Don't give yourself a time limit. It may take you years to heal from it. Whatever the initial trauma was. But you will see when other things come up that trigger you, when you have healed through that trauma, you will have tools that you can use to move through whatever it is that you need to move through. And you will see that you are stronger for whatever comes up. Because people that have gone through trauma normally go through stackable trauma, meaning they have one trauma over another trauma, right? The difference is when you start to heal and you have those tools, whatever comes up in your life, you will have a tool to handle it, to move through it. And you'll be able to understand your own self and where your thresholds are in order to move through and heal from that.
I was about to get teary-eyed, girl. What you doing? My goodness. Okay. And I know we could literally have this conversation for the next hour or two. However, I do have an event to go to, but I always try to make sure that we got the whole. So at the end of each episode, I ask the guests a special question. And this is something that is dear to me because it's one of those things that helped me through my traumas. If you could give advice to your younger self, no matter what age or time or space or whatever, what would you give them? I usually get a lot of good answers. So I'm asking you this question now. After everything you've been through and everything you're currently going through, and as you're going through life, if you could give advice to your younger self, older self, in between, what would be that advice?
Oh gosh. Well, I think for one, I think for my younger self to know that she isn't alone and that she will get through whatever comes her way, that she's strong enough inside to be able to move through whatever it is that is going to come up for her. And that there are people that she needs to watch out for and allow for them to come in and support her in the way that she does. And she doesn't have to hide from it. Don't hide from it. And so that would be the one thing that I would tell my younger self.
Beautiful. Beautiful. At this point, we might drop. I don't have anything else to say, honestly. It is a blessing, and it's also an honor to have you on my show. I truly appreciate you giving your time. From the first conversation that we had, I knew that we clicked. So can you tell people where to find you? Can you tell people where they can like book sessions with you? Like, give us the goods, girl.
Well, I'll start off with my book. So my book is on Amazon. It's in paperback form and it's on Kindle. Again, audiobook coming soon. I do have a website that you can go to. It does have talk about my speaking because I am a speaker, an international speaker. So it has that. It also has information on my coaching. And if any of your listeners want to book a free 40-minute discovery call with me, they can go on my website and utilize that to put in their email address and I will get back to them. It also has information on my book on my website as well. You can find me on TikTok. You can find me on IG. And I'm sure you'll have all that in the show notes. But yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So I'll just tell everybody, if you want to get in contact with Miss Susan Snow, there we go. Miss Snow over in this direction. She's on TikTok, Instagram, correct? And
yes,
all the other things that she has sent me, I will put them in the show notes so that way everybody will have them. But we thank you so much and welcome you to the Shadow Corner family.
Thank you.
And we will be talking soon, okay?
All right, sounds good. Have a great day.
You too. All right, everybody. So as we close out this show with 2 minutes to spare, I want to emphasize exactly what Miss Susan was saying. You are not alone. Trauma is universal. It's not just domestic. You have to be able to understand that, number one, you need help and recognize that. 2, understand that once you find that therapist or that person that's a safe space for you, understand that that's only half the battle. The other half is you choosing to accept Spirit's invitation on how to actually, excuse me, on how to actually get to know who you are and heal those inner wounds. Now, 3rd and finally, always make sure that you as a person are taking time out to give yourself grace for things that you can and cannot control, to the things that happen in day-to-day life. You have so much power and emphasis in you. There's unlike any other. Don't stifle your gifts because of others. Don't stifle your gifts because of what you feel like you have to be qualified for. Life makes you qualified. And that in itself is the best certification that Spirit gives you every single day. But like always, I will see you guys on the next go round. We'll have a Miss Kathy Nesbitt that turns compost into impact. I am your host, Cyan Gates, and we are officially